Hey, and welcome back to the latest installment of the Music History Project. Today we're going to be talking about the iconic music retailer, Mannys Music. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Music History Project. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth Dale.
And Dan Del Fiorentino.
And Mike Mullins.
All of our content comes from the Oral History Program, which is sponsored by NAM, the National Association of Music Merchants. And that is a program that is over 3,000 interviews and constantly growing. If you want to check out any of our content or any of the other interviews that aren't featured, please check out our website at www.nam.org/library. Who else could we be talking about when we talk about giant music retailers other than the institution that was Mannys Music?
Absolutely. And today we get that chance.
Hooray.
How thrilled are you, Mike?
I am so excited. Well, you know me. I like a good music store.
That's true. Having grown up in one.
And Mannys is just one of those stores that you always hear about. You hear the famous stories. It's kind of infamous for being that place where all the celebrities went. And I'm just excited to talk about it today.
Absolutely. And thanks to some interviews from the NAM Oral History Program, we are going to be discussing its history and some of the people who work there, and of course, its relevance in pop culture as well as the music products industry.
Yeah, so just before we kind of get started with some of our content here, we thought we'd go through a quick background with just some fast facts for you guys. And since I don't know them, I will stump our resident music historian.
So what were you thinking? Should we start with Manny?
Okay.
Manny Goldrich was born in 1905 and passed away in 1968. And along the way, in 1935, he started a small music shop in New York City on 48th Street that became very iconic for lots of reasons that we'll be hearing about in the next hour or so. And really, I think it was the people, as we're going to hear, the people who brought the products to the celebrities and to the their customers, both in New York. And because it was New York, it was quite a hub for all traveling musicians coming in and out of the area from England and so on. So oftentimes we heard that the first time somebody from England got to play a Fender guitar, it was at Manny's. Those kind of stories have come to us over the years. So it was really a hub for lots of different reasons. And speaking of the people, Manny had a son named Henry, and we were so fortunate to have interviewed Henry in 2003. And his two sons, Ian and Judd, were both interviewed in 2017. So we are really going to be basing our podcast today on mostly the three of them and their contributions to the Oral History Program by regaling us with the story of that store and the founder, Manny. How's that for an intro?
That was beautiful.
I feel like I know so much now.
I know, right?
I felt like I did in one breath, too.
Well, I don't think Mike and I can contribute much after that. We can't. It's hard to follow.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just roll the first clip. So we're going to be hearing from Ian Goldrich first, and he's going to be talking about Mannys history. Is there anything else we want to say about Ian before we get started?
Nope. Looking forward to it.
All right. Here he is.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your family came to the industry and how that developed?
Well, I think that you've probably heard it from my father when he did the oral history, but my grandfather Manny was a musician who started working for Con Selmer in New York, was a salesperson for, I don't think it was Con Selmer, it was Con at the time. And he was a salesperson in New York, and the legend is that he started making more money than whoever the president of the company was at the time, so they fired him. And he said, well, I can do this on my own, established a little shop on 48th Street in Midtown, and became sort of the mecca of the music industry for New York. It wasn't just retailers, there were rehearsal studios there were clubs, there were lessons, a lot of people on 48th Street, and it became known as Music Row. So that store sort of centered a lot of the Music Row at the time in the 30s and 40s.
It really became a hub. Which I think
really was. And that was a hub until the end of the recording business in New York. The end of the recording business was the early '90s, and our industry pushed towards that. At the time, I was going to an AES show and a NAMM show, the '80s, and now the AES show is sort of passé because the ADAC came along and kind of revolutionized everything. So the recording studio business went away, and all the guys that would have dates every single day, 3-4 recording dates a day, and they'd say, well, let's meet at Manny's for lunch between gigs. Manny's and 48th Street was really known as a hub for that whole thing, whether it was Broadway, recording guys, writers. What's the name of the Brill Building was right around the corner, so that was filled with musicians and writers. And it was, a quarter of a block away. Yeah, it was a fun street. It was a fun street. It all changed in the 90s as far as the gatherings went.
I always had the impression, although I don't really know this for sure, that one of the reasons Manny's became so important, certainly in rock history and the music industry, is because folks in England would come to New York, and that would be the place to go, and sometimes and often the only time they could get some instruments that they could not get in Europe. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the first stop was typically 48th Street. They'd get off the plane and they'd hit, they'd get into their limos if they had them, and they'd come to 48th Street. I mean, I've met a lot of people, a lot of that classic rock, a lot of the classic rock people, but I wasn't there for the really great times in the 60s when my old man would tell me, that George and Paul would be in the store, and John would walk in, and Paul Simon would come in, and the guys would sit around and they'd jam, in the back of the store. And people would watch, nobody bothered them, but they'd come in. And the part about the instruments is absolutely true. I mean, there was U.S. manufacturers, Gibson and Fender, Rickenbacker and Gretsch guitars. That's what people wanted as far as the instruments went. And there was really no distribution in Europe for that stuff. I mean, we were the distributors. We sent hundreds and hundreds of guitars to England and Germany at that time, all not good, I mean, the manufacturers didn't like it, but quite honestly, they never established a really great supply chain at that time. So, yeah, we sent a lot of instruments over there. I guess I can say it now. It's not a big deal. It's 40 years later.
I won't tell anyone.
Yeah, that's all right.
And tell me a little bit about how the street changed. I mean, going back to the early days with your grandfather and so on, how did that... It
changed. Well, you know what? Like I said, there was a lot of different kinds of businesses there, and they were all there. And that continued through the 70s. Through the 70s, the rehearsal studios didn't stay, but the retailers stayed. And at one point in the 70s, there must have been 15 stores on the block. Really good stores, too. I mean, there were a couple of... And everybody kind of had their little niche as well.
Rod Baltimore.
Rod was there, and We Buy Guitars was vintage, and Silver in Orland, and Sam Ash came along. The competition started, I guess, when Sam Ash hit the street. Everybody kind of had their niche. Manny sold everything, but we weren't good at recorders. We weren't good at a lot of things. We never sold pianos. So everybody had their own thing. We sold vintage instruments, but We Buy really owned that market. So that lasted through the 70s, and then in the 80s it started going away a little bit, and then the 90s, Manny's had different problems. Everybody had Terminal Music went away, We Buy went away, Silver and Orland went away, and slowly it started shrinking. Now if you walk down the street, there's nothing there. I was there the other day. I parked across the street, and there's all the shops are shuttered.
Is there not even the Manny sign or the clock or any of that?
The clock sign is there. There was a sign on the facade, and there was this very well-known piece of marble in the front that said Manny's on it. This facade sign and the piece of marble was taken off by, we had it taken off, and that's going, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame paid for that. So that's in storage right now in New Jersey, waiting for them to set up a place. And they wanted to take that vertical sign, that big Manny sign with the clock, but the hall is a glass pyramid, and they really couldn't figure it out. So the buildings are coming down shortly, and we're working on finding a home for that sign. Fred Gretsch has a museum in Savannah, so he's expressed interest in it, but it's expensive. You got to deal with New York and closing the street and putting up big cranes. It's a $30,000 operation to take it down. Yeah. So we'll see what happens to it.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the streets were pretty desolate, though. It's pretty depressing.
I bet it is.
And now everybody's kind of spread out. Guitar Center came into town. They've got two shops, 14th and 44th. Sam Ash is on 34th. Rudy's is downtown in the Village. There are a couple of smaller shops around, guitar shops, horn shops, but it's nothing like it was on 48th Street, where there was really one place where all the musicians could go to, and the competition was good, and it brought more people. It doesn't happen like that.
Tell me a little bit about Manny. Did he live long enough for you to know him?
I was 10 when he died, so I sort of knew him, but I knew him as a grandfather, and I was his first grandson, so I was a prize child. I have two older female cousins who, when I came along, it was a miracle, I guess. So I only knew him as a really, really, really great grandfather. My understanding is he was a really, really, really tough boss. He was great to musicians, though. I mean, he established himself as a place to go for a lot of the black musicians of the time. He gave them credit when nobody else would, and that goes back. That went back to the early days. The store opened in '35, and he was giving credit out to the black musicians, as early as when he opened. Take the horn and give me $5 a week kind of deal. And I have a book, or maybe my brother has it, where some of those things are notated, and all the famous musicians of the time, Sonny Rollins, everybody was in the book, So on a personal level, I don't really remember too much. Never saw him at work.
So once again, that was Ian Goldrich, and next up, we're going to hear from his brother, Jud Goldrich.
I started when I was tremendously young. My father, my brother and I both, were crawling on boxes when we were young. I mean, we started off in the store before we could work. We were there, hanging around. But then when we were old enough to work, we started in the stock department and worked our way up to sales. And then eventually, after college, running the store. The store was surrounded by other great stores. At that time, I think there were 30 music stores on the block. And it was just a sight to be seen. And competitive, but different niches. Each store, there's an accordion store. And Sam Ash, of course, was a powerhouse. And it drew a lot of people to the street. And, of course, we had family members there. We had 17 family members there at one store at one time, I think. And as good as that sounds, it was also some of the challenges that go along with working in a family and business,
Did you get to know Manny?
He passed away when I was 9, so not tremendously well. I have memories, but not like there were any teachable moments or anything. My father was really thrust into the position because it was an accident, the way he passed, and unexpected. And right before the store opened, when the store moved, the store was in Rockefeller Center. And it was right around where the tree is. And there were a bunch of stores there that were holding out that wouldn't sell to Rockefeller. And then my grandfather got a great deal along with these other 4 or 5 shops. And the deal was to build a store somewhere else in the city. And they built the store that we were the first store on 48th Street between 6th and 7th, Music Row. And the shame of it all was my grandfather never got to see the grand opening. He passed away the year before, which was a shame. And all 5, I think one was a restaurant, a hat maker, none of the people who took the deal from Rockefeller lived to see the building be built. And that was everybody's deal, which was a shame.
Yeah, that is a shame.
Yeah.
Where was it before 48th Street?
Well, it was on 48th Street, but up the street in Rockefeller Center.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it was right where the tree is right now, yeah.
Do you know if the Manny sign and the clock came with it, or was that made for that new building?
I'm pretty sure it was made for the new building because this other store was because I have pictures of the old store. The clock and the sign with the clock, the horizontal sign was built for the building. It's actually 3 stories high, so it was a challenge. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has taken the flat sign, the vertical sign, and the terrazzo marble that said Manny's when you walked in, and building an exhibit in Cleveland. But they were all put in the new store. And the new store was pretty amazing because it had chandeliers in it. It was crazy. Manny's music was just, the original Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that's what we call it now because some of the stuff that was on the building is actually going out to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they're going to put an exhibit up because, legitimately everybody used to shop there. There were some stories that I could tell, some fabulous, fabulous stories. I mean, one of the best was when David Bowie and Mick Jagger were doing Dancing in the Streets. They were recording it on Right Track, which was right on 48th Street on Music Row, and it was Thanksgiving, the Friday of Thanksgiving, our busiest day, and that was when Black Friday was Black Friday insanity. And I remember being up on the mezzanine in the store, and all of a sudden, this store was jamming, and it never, ever, ever, anything's ever happened like this. Completely stopped. Mick Jagger and David Bowie walk in the store to shop, and they see my father Henry, and big hug, but the store legitimately froze for a minute, and it was 2 of the most powerful guys in the industry, so that was kind of cool. But it was the Beatles, it was Hendrix, it was so many of the great performers of the day. It was a great store.
Well, and going way back, I mean, when Manny was there, I mean, all the big band guys, right? I mean, that
Ella Fitzgerald, it's all of them. Duke. It was, my grandfather used to have a golf tournament that, Earl Garner used to play. Sammy Davis Jr. used to play at the golf tournament in Queens at the Engineers Golf Course in Queens. Right around the corner from here. So, yeah, it's got a pretty tremendous legacy. So
perfect. As we're sort of building the history here from Ian and Judd's interviews of Manny's music, they're basically the 3rd generation talking about the history and their grandfather. Let's move over to their father, Henry Goldrich, who is Manny's son.
Our first location from 1935 until 1958 or 59 was at 120 West 48th Street. And then Rockefeller came in, and they wanted to rip it down and put up McGraw Hill. And my father wouldn't sell, and he wouldn't sell, and he wouldn't sell. Finally, they made him a deal he couldn't refuse. And they built us a brand new building down the road at 156 West 48th Street, halfway down on 48th Street, but still on 48th Street. And we moved in there in 1959, and we expanded it, changed it all around 20 times. But it's been there ever since.
So that was Henry, and all those interview clips you just heard were all reflecting on the history of Manny. So if you were unfamiliar with the store there in New York City, now you're a subject matter expert.
That's our goal. That should be our goal.
Right.
I like it.
I feel like we do that every 2 weeks anyways.
I think we should. Nice.
And we thought, you can't talk Manny's without talking celebrities. You just can't.
Well, that's what they were really known for, right? Was the people that would come in the door.
Absolutely.
And that was part of the excitement when you would go there, just kind of as a customer or just to look at the gear that they had, that maybe someone famous was there, someone that you heard on the radio was buying a new guitar or something crazy like that.
And as we're about to hear, the story of how Manny first had the idea of putting celebrity pictures up on the wall started in the big band era. Remember, it started in 1935, so that was the height of the swing era in the United States, the Benny Goodmans and the Tommy Dorseys. And so Manny was smart enough to say, hey, if you shop here, do you mind if I put your picture up? And oftentimes they would sign a glossy, and he'd frame it. And by the time the 50s and 60s roll around, it was basically a who's who of popular music, not only in the United States, but around the world.
And what's really cool about that is there is now a book you can buy. And the Goldriches put it out, and it's called The Wall of Fame, New York City's Legendary Manny's Music. So it's a pretty substantial book, just with some information in there, but accompanying that is a lot of really great images, both of gear and memorabilia, but also of those signed glossy photos. as I'm flipping through it, which is why I'm distracted.
I mean, like everybody, Buddy Holly to The Who, just an amazing assortment of stories and pictures.
Yeah, so jump online or go to your book retailer, nearest book retailer, and look it up because it's pretty neat. So here is Ian and Judd talking about pictures on the wall at Manny's.
Was it his idea to put those pictures up on the
Yes.
wall? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there were like 4,000 pictures on the wall, and all of them signed. And he started it early because the big band stuff is all there. We moved from a little shop closer to 6th Avenue on 48th Street to the shop where it just closed. And all of the old big band pictures were way up top, you know. So once again, we moved. My grandfather died before we moved into the building. We moved in '69, and he died in '69. So he never saw the building, but he was part of the architect part, and all the big band pictures were up top. So, and there were a lot of them. So he must have started early, you know, and it became fairly well known. It was I think Guitar Player, Rolling Stone, or some big magazine wrote an article that said, you know, you want to get your picture on what was the tagline? It's not the Bob Dylan song, "Picture on the Wall of Mannys" or something along those lines. You know, so.
I remember we interviewed Brian Setzer, and he says, you know, you make it when your picture is in Manny's.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
that was really the concept, really, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, and my father would get the pictures, and depending on whether he liked you or not, was where your place on the wall was. No, seriously, he said, "No, you know what? He's not supposed to put him over there." You know. Yeah, we actually we got Bill Clinton's, because Bill Clinton, when he became president, was a musician first, maybe not the first musician president. So we got a picture of him signed, and we put him in a pretty good spot, you know. So,
what happened to those pictures?
Sam Ash owns them, and a lot of them are crated up. Some I think were sold, but they're in boxes out in Hicksville. Yep. I mean, I guess they'd like to monetize it if possible, but right now the Manny's name is not in use. I'm sure one day they may decide to do it. You know, market's tough. It's not an easy thing to run two brands. You know, it's hard enough to get your brand out there instead of having two brands at the same time. So it might get used again. Huh? Not by me. I'm done. I'm done.
Well, you know, in my position, I hear about this store all the time, particularly with musicians who thought as soon as their picture was on the wall, they knew they made it. Can you tell me a little bit about the pictures?
Yeah, it was pretty impressive collection of pictures, and the musicians, funny enough, some would come in with their picture. You know, it was kind of interesting that they would have their picture on it, but you know, it was a great tradition that was solicited by my grandfather to start. The old store had pictures wrapping around it, and the new store, of course, I mean, we don't have the number of how many pictures, but from the Beatles to Frank Zappa to the Stones to a great one that said, from Bob Dylan, that said, "Keep one eye closed at all costs," and lots of them, you know, with the love of my father, you know, because he had such a fabulous relationship with, and he touched so many musicians. It was the greatest part of the business. You know, Henry was legitimately a rock star to the rock stars because he really took great care of them.
Cool. That was Jed Goldrich, and how cool is it to hear these stories? I just love it. I was so lucky to have had the chance to go to Manny's before they closed, and just being in there, I totally get that sort of historic sense looking up on the wall. There was a great interview that we did with Brian Setzer talking about looking up at Manny's and seeing the signed picture of Buddy Holly and how cool that was to him and inspirational it was to him as a young kid. Which reminds me, there are several celebrities that we've interviewed over the years who have talked about Manny, several of which we have web clips up on our site. Bill Pittman, Robbie Robertson, John Schofield and Brian Setzer, as I mentioned. So take a look and listen at some of those interviews as well. How can they approach getting to the Mannys tag on our site?
Oh, that's a very good question. You can head over to www.nam.org/library and click on Advanced Search, and then we have a feature right there where you can search for all of our different tags, including Manny's music.
Well said, Mike. Thank you.
That's awesome. And to possibly get you guys off track here for just a second, do you think pictures on the wall that they did at Manny's, you know how you see in movies and TVs how dry cleaners do that? Do you think dry cleaners ripped off Manny's music? I mean, Manny was doing it in like the 40s and the 50s.
Mm, that's a really good question. What came first, Manny's or the dry cleaners? I don't know.
Yeah, like maybe he was sitting in a dry cleaner one day and he's like, oh,
that's a good idea.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Or maybe the other way around.
You know what I think? I think some, musician came in and said, you can hang my picture up if I can get that reed for free.
Anyways, okay. All right, so kind of getting back to celebrities here, we're going to hear from Henry Goldrich talking about two specific examples working with some pretty big names in music. So I think I'll just let him tell you who they are.
Jimmy... when he first came into the store, he was working for a guy named Curtis Knight. I got my memory for an old man. Curtis Knight had a rhythm and blues thing, and we used to work the street, 45th Street. And Jimmy played with him. And Jimmy came in and bought a guitar for me. He didn't have all the money. He owed me about $180. And I charged him. I mean, he was a really straight ahead, nice guy in those days. I knew Curtis. They okayed the charge. And he went to England. A year goes by. Comes into the store. Pays me. Thanked me very much for trusting him. And he became probably my best customer that I ever had. He used to come in, buy 5-6 guitars, 4 amplifiers, any new toy that was on the market. Loved them all. In fact, I have pictures of him. You've never been to my other store.
No.
We have some like 2,000 or 3,000 autographed pictures on the walls. From everybody there is. Everybody, except Elvis, he would never give a picture. From President Clinton, a rotten saxophone player, to movie stars, every movie star. Shirley MacLaine, Bruce Willis is always in the store. It was a lot of fun. So we started collecting the pictures too. I'm digressing. So back to Jimmy. So Jimmy used to come in the store, and then he became very famous. So he started to use some drugs. So he was starting to slide a little bit. So when he came in, we used to keep the store open after 6 o'clock for him. And he was a very gentle person, always polite. In fact, my father, who passed away in 68, I'm sorry, my mother was still working in the store. She used to work the cashier. He once went there and gave her a $10 tip. He knew she was my mother, but that's the kind of guy he was. He was very generous. Anything that was different, he loved the way that I fixed his guitars. He played a right-handed guitar, strung left-handed. And we used to wire up the pickups in this, we used to take one wire and change one wire. So it became a little bit hotter, I guess. And he loved that. He bought more guitars for me. In fact, until I retired, I used to get one phone call a week saying, "Did you sell Jimmy this guitar?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you put it in writing?" I said, "No." I mean, everybody wanted the proof that was Jimmy's guitar. In fact, Eric Barrett, who was Jimmy's manager, called me at home recently. Wanted to know about some guitar we sold him. We both remember the day he bought it. But Jimmy was very good. And
did he buy one type of instrument more than another? Or
no, he bought mostly Fenders. But anything that came out that was good, he bought. Mosrites, he bought Gibsons. Anything that was different. He bought anything that struck his fan. He could buy anything he wanted. And he was very generous with the equipment. There's a kid that came into my store, was his fan. He gave him 2 guitars. We just bought him. Kid walked in, "I love you, Jimmy, I love you." Gave him 2 guitars. What kind of guy he was.
We talk about the Beatles and their impact with just about every instrument that they touched. Mm-hmm. Can you relate how that impacted?
Well, let's discuss first the Hofner bass. We wouldn't sell one. I consider them a very thin-sounding, not well-made instrument. When McCartney started using it, I had to buy them by the dozens Couldn't get enough of them. And the price went from, I think, from $89.50 up to $489.50. Rickenbacker. The guy who owned the company, his name was John Hall. He couldn't sell his guitars. Then that hit. Gibson and Fender, that never had the problem. But those two companies really, Vox. Vox was unbelievable. They came into us and they sold us the line. And I think that every 5 amplifiers we had of theirs, 3 of them blew up. The 2 that were good were unbelievable. But the 3, we had more problems with their stuff. And then one day, they said to me, come on down. McCartney's doing a show down there. We want to show them something different. I want you to see it. They had the wah-wah, first wah-wah pedal. That was the Vox wah-wah. That was something else. That really changed the whole business too. Huh. And he fell in love with that. So did we. We used to buy them by the ton. But the Vox stuff, it was just unbelievable. Their Continental organ, which everybody used, was the only one on the market in those days. We had to learn to do fast repairs on them because they always fell apart. Then, of course, they finally figured out what was wrong with them, and now they're good. Years ago, it was just a horrible piece of equipment.
That's interesting.
Yeah. A lot of companies.
Even like Zildjian had been around for years. Did they had a huge impact, right, from the Beatles?
Oh yeah.
Ludwig too.
Bill Ludwig gave Ringo a gold snare drum. He did. I guess the 2 brothers were Bob and Armin Zildjian, which they don't talk. Well, one of them, Armin, just died. Mm-hmm. But they really became. You're right. Zildjian was very. And Ludwig. I'm sorry, I should have thought about that one too. Because all the drums. In fact, the matter is, when they did Shea Stadium, we got a rush phone call from the road manager for Ringo. He forgot his hi-hat stand. So my brother-in-law had to go running out to the stadium and deliver it. Before he got backstage, it was unbelievable. And then he left and didn't watch the concert. Never forgave him for that. But they loved Ludwig. They did good with that in Zildjian. And they played everything though. They weren't they signed up for nobody. They didn't authorize any kind of use of their names.
Interesting.
Yeah, but they liked They liked musical instruments. They used to love to try anything that was different. They used to come in and just spend 2-3 hours in the store trying everything. Same thing with Hendrix. He used to do all of them. When they got to be that kind of a personality, and we had the money, all the money they wanted to spend, they would buy 4 of everything and just try them, and if they didn't like it, give it away.
So switching gears just a little bit, and on probably a much more somber note, but interesting for me as a historian, part of the goal is not just to document the history of the music products industry and these companies and people, but also to get a sense of the time and the era in which they lived. And oftentimes that allowed us to talk about some social impacts that music and non-music topics. For example, I often interviewed people who worked during the big band era who were drafted in World War II, and those experiences often talked about music, but maybe didn't. So we try to document those whenever possible. And for some reason, I just had it in my head. I mean, going to New York City and thinking about 9/11 in 2017 when I met with Ian and Judd, I just took the time to ask them about their experiences on that day. And I'm really glad I did, because it helps us document, and it helps us as Americans, that vow that we all took to never forget. And I just think that pausing here and honoring that is an important element.
Yeah, I don't think you can examine a New York institution, whether it's a music retailer or a financial building on Wall Street or, I don't know, anything else that's synonymous with New York City and not integrate that into that event, into part of the history in that story. So, way to go, Dan, on being cognizant of that and capturing that. And we'll let Ian and Judd reflect on their experiences.
Another thing, if you don't mind, sort of a aside, we're documenting some of the social things that have happened during your career as well. Were you working on 48th Street during 9/11?
Yes. I was actually driving in that day. I had to close. So I come up past the, on the New Jersey Turnpike, past the airport, Newark Airport, when I'm listening to traffic because I need to figure out which tunnel I'm going to take coming in. And the pilot says something just crashed into the tower. And so I could actually see it. You know, it's about, by the crow, it's about 2 miles away. So could see it burning, and then I make the loop coming down into the tunnel, and right before I get out to that loop, the second plane hits, and I got stopped before going into the tunnel and turned around. That's when and then the Pentagon got hit, and that's when they knew it was a terrorist attack, and they basically shut down the city. I was there. I was not in the city. My brother was. He was at the store. And I said, dude, I call him up. I got through. Cell phone stuff stopped after a little bit, but they said, dude, you got to get out of there. You know, get out of the city, otherwise you're never going to get out. And he's like, no, man, I'm unloading the UPS truck. You know, but I have to tell you, when I said before that retail's not easy in New York, we're dealing with cranky people. New Yorkers changed after that. Visibly changed, like right away. I know I changed. I used to, you're in Times Square, where we are at Times Square right now. You walk outside right now, it could take you 10 minutes to walk 2 blocks because of all the people. And it used to really frustrate me, 5 tourists walking down the sidewalk all in a row, and you can't pass them. And I basically walk on the street and curse them, or not, I wouldn't curse under my breath. All of that stuff stopped. I stopped doing that. I became, for a good 5-6 years, I was a nicer person until I reverted back to my regular self. But New Yorkers were nicer. New York definitely changed. It was really very much we're going to all suffer together here. It was different. It was difficult. It's difficult. And, I went to my wife's cousin's husband died, and we went to, because we live down on the Jersey coast, and it's kind of there's a high-speed ferry to Wall Street, so we knew a lot of people. So we went to his funeral and 2 memorial services where, after that, and it was a really hard time in New York. My father was retired. It was one of the things that he should be happy that, because business definitely suffered. There was no tourism from
right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a tough time. It's still hard. You see airplanes coming over. I still have the memory of it. I see airplanes coming by, and I still think about that day. So, but you get through. It's New York. We had a blackout a couple of years later where it was like 4 p.m. and everything, all the lights went out. It ended up being an explosion down in a sub center down downtown. Oh, actually, no, maybe it was something happened maybe out west. Anyway, the whole city went down, and people panicked for a little bit until we figured out what it was, and then it was kind of cool. Then it was all right, but we can't stay in business. Let's see if there are any bars open that do by candlelight, and then it was kind of fun, but the whole specter of it, maybe another thing happening in New York, went through everybody's mind, and it never goes away. Never goes away.
I was in the store at 9/11. We were my brother, as I know, was in the tunnel on the way into the city. I was in the store, and it was blasted out everywhere, and people were panicking because the word was there was a plane on their way to Rockefeller Center, which was, of course, right around the corner. We closed. We closed immediately, sent everybody home. The whole bottom line was to make sure all the employees were safe. I had a brother-in-law who worked down on Wall Street, so I went down there to see how he was doing, and I found him, unbelievably so, and he was covered in soot, and it was horrible. We took him to, they were setting up triage hospitals all around. And I took him there, and he was fine, thank God. But one of the horrible things and scary things was these hospitals were empty. I mean, they expected tons of casualties, but so many people passed because of the tragedy. It was horrible. It was a horrible day. I have 3 kids. They were all tremendously concerned where I was. It was a hard day and a really hard couple weeks, followed up by a hard couple months to follow. It was hard to get New York back in its place, and of course, New York is tremendously resilient, and it happened. But yeah, my goal was to get everybody home, and get everybody home safely.
And not to belittle that at all, but it also had a most immediate impact on business, didn't it?
Yes, business suffered tremendously from 9/11. New York, New York is in a tough place right now in terms of making music. There's so many large studios, and 9/11 was the start of it, kind of. So many large studios have closed. So many venues have closed. It's not only things like 9/11 and safety and the being in a large city like Manhattan, it's the pricing. People are priced out. So New York has definitely changed in terms of music making. I do everything in my power with all of the venues. It's some part of my business, working for the Artist Relations and Guitar Center, working with the venues, making sure that we're bringing musicians into Manhattan as venues close, as studios close.
So moving into our next section, we are going to hear how Mannys unfortunately ended business, and it was purchased by Sam Ash in 1999 and kept alive for a couple more years, and it had a really good run, and we're going to hear from Henry and Ian as well as Judd talking about closing down the store.
So what made Mannys the place to be? Was it location? Was it
no, there were a lot when we first got started on 40th Street in the 50s when the music really started. There must have been 15, 20 stores in that street. Why Mannys was the most popular? Well, I guess we had the best sales force. We had the most knowledge. The name Mannys was world-renowned by then from the fathers of the rock and rollers, who were musicians if they were. They were big band people. They told their kids, hey, Mannys is the place to go. And they always came there. In fact, there was a thing in Rolling Stone magazine that they'd rather have their picture on the wall at Mannys Music Store than on a cover of a magazine. And I have that copy at home.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was pretty nice. And we got written up in every magazine, every rock star when they took pictures. Took them at Mannys. When Freddie and the Dreamers first came to New York years ago, they had to do their photo shoot at Mannys, in the window upstairs at Mannys. When I can't think of, there must have been dozens upon dozens of people. Guns N' Roses, they're one of the best videos at Mannys. They just all, it was a nice atmosphere, and nobody got bugged. When the Beatles walked into the store, nobody went running over to them, asked for the pictures or autographs. They knew that the kids that came into our store, even the amateurs, knew what they were doing and knew to have respect for the musicians. Sure, they eyed them and they enjoyed maybe getting hello. And that's one thing about the Beatles. They never refused a handshake or a hello. They were very nice.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about how your career changed, because with Mannys being bought out, what happened there and where did you go?
Well, I've basically been doing the same thing my whole life. It didn't change very much. We sold Mannys to Sam Ash in 1999. My brother and I were the only family members that moved with the company. And we ran Mannys together because Sam Ash was trying to establish that brand as well. So we ran Mannys right on 48th Street, right next to Sam Ash's, right next to 4 Sam Ash's that were there. And my brother and I ran that. And then Judd moved to California to open up a Mannys out there. I stayed, and I ran Mannys until we closed it in 2009. I made it into one very large Sam Ash music store, broke through walls. I mean, New York is a very different kind of place. You know, there are little alleyways through buildings, you know, multiple buildings. So there are 5 buildings all connected by a couple doors. So we ran this. It was a very big Sam Ash. I actually ran the Sam Ashes. I ran at all 5 Sam Ashes on 48th Street. And that all ended in 2013. Basically, the block got bought up by Rockefeller Group, and they are planning a 9.6 million square foot office tower. Yeah, yeah, shame, right? But we moved to 34th Street. I'm running the 34th Street store, which is the main store on the Sam Ash chain, and so I really haven't moved. You know, I'm as stable as you can get. Yeah, I'm still doing the same thing. Actually, the big difference is I'm working for a different family, not my own, which is great. It's the best. I hear about the Ash brothers fighting, and I just laugh at them. You know, I say, guys, I'm so happy it's you guys, not me and my brother and family. So it's really that's a good thing. But it takes a little bit of a difference. You know, I work for somebody as opposed to being my own boss. That took a year or two. A year to get through, but it's a really good company to work for, so I'm happy.
Now, did you help establish a new location on
Yes.
34th? What was that like for you?
That was, I mean, the Ash people got the location and did the build out, and I wasn't any part of that. But the whole shutting down of 48th Street and moving the stuff. So we had five storefronts in 10 different locations. So 10 different street addresses, but 5 locations, and moving all of that stuff to one location and then opening up in 5 days, which was unbelievably stressful, you know. And I thought we were going to have a little bit more time to do that, you know, than the 5 days. But, you know, you got to get the customers in. So, yeah, it was interesting. And, you know, it took a little bit of time to continue clearing out 48th Street. These are old buildings that were around. I mean, the Mannys building was the newest one, and it was built in 1969 when we moved in 2013. So that building was almost 50 years old. And the other ones were even older. So there were little cubbies, and there were condemned floors. It was really kind of crazy. It was very New York. Very New York, you know. I mean, you couldn't run a business in some of these places anywhere else, but in New York. But you know, it was fun. It was good. It was a good experience. You know, we pulled it off. Did you
discover anything cool when you were moving that?
Closing it up?
Yeah.
You know, I think we probably gone through the place a bunch of times before that. We ended up throwing a lot of stuff out. I mean, dumpsters, just one right after the other. So that was, you know, what's still there, what's still in the building is this 6-foot, 5,000-pound safe. It's on the 3rd floor of Manny's, and it's still there. And I don't know how we got it in there at the time. It had to be craned in, and I don't know how they're going to get it out. But that's one thing I wasn't taking. Leave that. I opened it up, make sure it was empty. But yeah, leave that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so now you're working for the Sam Ash and the Ash family, and seemed like you're really enjoying that.
Well, you know what? I grew up with them. Jerry and Bernice and Henry and Judy, my parents, were friends. They would travel together with Marge and Chuck Levin from Washington Music. So the six of them would travel. They'd go to Frankfurt show, and then they'd travel for 2 weeks together. So I knew Richard and Sammy back when we were teenagers. So it was really easy for me to, become part of that family. We became very, very. They moved on to 48th Street in the 70s, and that's right when I kind of came into the business. And back then, there was such a thing as an exclusive in the business. Where you actually established the line, and so we sold it, but so Sam Ash couldn't. And we fought for those. We really fought tooth and nail for those, even though we were friends. Once we were on the street, you weren't. So we became competitors. I think I kind of soured the relationship between my parents and the Ashes because of some of this stuff. But you know what? It all went away over time. You fight for your exclusive. I remember making deals. We made a deal with Emu. Emu was going out of business right before the Proteus came out. And I was off, and my father called me and says they want $50,000 up front, and we'll get the first how many Proteus ones. And I said, Dad, it's going to be a revolutionary product, but it's they might go out of business too. So we gave them the $50,000, and that was another product where every one of them that came in was back ordered. You had a line of people waiting for them, and we got 100 of them in, and we offloaded them off the truck, and they were packed individually. It's not like there were 5 in a box; they were packed individually. And my father said, "Leave them out in front of the store," so Richie Ash could walk by and see 100 Proteuses light stacked up in front, just to piss him off. He was good like that. I remember we would get shipments from Calzone, and we would order cases for bands, and they'd have their names stenciled on the cases. We did this for all the big bands, and I remember the Clash had red cases, right, all of them, and they ordered 40, 50 cases. One thing, we couldn't take them all in at the same time because they were big road cases, but Henry said, leave them out on the street, right, with all the Clash signs facing out. And it was just the sort of little stuff that the marketing stuff, we never advertised. We never put an ad in a paper or anything, but he would do that kind of stuff that would, if there were cell phones back then, people would have been all over it, So, yeah, Street was pretty dynamic, a lot of fun, a lot of good memories, and bad ones, but overall it's a good experience.
The demise of Mannys was a very big challenge. I mean, it was heartfelt, painful. But, at the end, as my brother and I moved on from it, it was fine. It was, almost like relief. The company was bought by Sam Ash. They did great things for us. I went out and opened up Manny's Music in L.A. under the Ash umbrella. They treated us fabulously. My brother continues to work for the Ash family, and I moved on to work with Guitar Center, where I've been with them for 13 years, and ran one of their largest stores in the chain, the Union Square store in Manhattan. And now, for 3 years, I've been their artist relations manager on the East Coast, which gives me an opportunity to really do what my father did phenomenally well at Manny's, and what I've always done is be sort of a concierge for the musician. What I do is I service the musician, certainly not just with price, but with just fabulous service. And it's in my wheelhouse. It's what I grew up on, and I think Guitar Center saw that and moved me into that role 3 years ago, and it's almost a blessing. So from the demise of Manny's to the onset of where we are now, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
So that's the Goldriches reflecting on kind of the end of the era of Manny's there. We're going to start to wrap up this podcast here by hearing from Judd and Ian on pretty much the legacy of Manny's and what made it so successful, and kind of my interpretation of these next clips are what elevated Manny's into this like iconic status after its closure, after the doors shut for the final time. And I think Judd and Ian are the perfect people to do it, and they say it in an excellent way.
The start of the success of Manny's came from my grandfather, Manny. You know, he was a brass salesman that ended up opening a store because he had tremendous success in Harlem with all the musicians down there. And he did something that was unheard of. He started giving credit, opening house accounts to all the musicians. You know, it was just insane that it was just something that was unheard of. I actually have one of the original, what do you call it, like registers, handwritten registers, where all of a sudden you see it's from 1935, they're opening up AR accounts. And I think his generosity and his trust was one of the reasons why for the flourishment. And then, of course, they moved to 48th Street, and lots of stores came on the street. And I think that was an awesome way to attract everybody because it was competitive. It was fabulous.
The reason that I'm sitting here is not because I'm still in the business, and it's not the longevity factor. I know it's because of the Mannys part of it. You can talk to Sammy about the business as it is right now, and he did, I think. So he can give you insight into the business, into the workings of Sam Ash, into their locations and things like that. So I guess I'm here, and my brother will be here because of the Mannys part of it, and I think that'll never go away. That Mannys. I've made peace with my grandfather for blowing it, because essentially it was 13 family members work in the store, which is really overwhelming. But my brother and I are the ones who ended up selling it. We were at the head when we had to sell it. So I made peace with my grandfather, but it's still quite a legacy.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm in this chair and I'm asking people about music store experiences, it can be professionals, and that's the number one answer.
Yeah,
is Manny's.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
Yeah, we my sister put a book out, which is like a memory book. It's just a picture. It's a picture book basically of all the pictures on the wall. But when the store shuttered, there were multiple people who put pictures of them by this piece of marble on the ground, kneeling by the piece of marble. I mean, I'm not big into following people, but somebody sent me an Al Di Meola one where I was there. Sarah Jessica Parker was there. So all these people are going there, paying homage to the place that used to be there. So yeah, that's got nothing to do with me. That's all my grandfather and father. Yeah, I just got a job.
Another cool thing about Manny's is there's so many folks that started there and then went on either to rep
Sure.
or to work in manufacturing.
Yes. Yeah.
As a result, you probably have friends all over the industry.
There are a lot of people. Yeah, there are a lot of people that moved on. Yeah, we back in the day we hired a lot of good people and we paid people well. So, and then they would get poached, because there's, working retail is not easy. You're on your feet a good part of the day, and you're dealing with the public, and the New York public can be a little bit crankier than others, and so if you got a job as a manufacturer's rep or going to a manufacturer, you took it. So yeah, a lot of people moved on from there. It was good. It's a good thing.
So before we say goodbye, we have one more voice to introduce because we can't leave this podcast about Manny's music without hearing from this staple of Manny's history.
Right. We were so grateful to all those involved with helping us arrange an interview with Murray Sunshine. Yes, that's his real name. And he was Sunshine. We interviewed him in 2008, and to great delight. He had story after story after story. And what was really cool is the beginning of his career all started because Manny himself hired Murray to work in his store. He then had a long 60-year-plus career in music retailing in New York, thanks to that start, and just an iconic guy in our world. Murray was born in 1924 and passed away just this year, 2018, and we miss him already. He's certainly missed. He contributed a lot to a lot of people's knowledge of the industry and always took the time to help young people out who had questions. I hear about him being a mentor to many people. So Elizabeth had a great idea of playing a clip from his interview, so I'd love to have you introduce it.
Yeah, I mean, while this podcast has been predominantly all the Goldrich family, we thought who better to include than Murray. And he kind of sums up the thoughts on the importance of music extremely well, with a little bit of humor interjected in there too. So I hope you guys like it, and I hope it resonates with you, and you kind of keep his thoughts in your mind when you're thinking about music and encouraging others to pick up and play. So we'll leave you with Murray, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I used to have a debate with somebody that was on the Board of Education, who happened to be a relative of mine, but that's not. He was on the Board of Education, one of the schools in Long Island, and I used to sit with him, and he used to say how stupid it was to have these kids scratching on violins and how terrible they sound and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, that's the learning process, you know. He says, well, you should go to the gym, and I wrestle with my kids, and we have fun doing that. This whole thing didn't make sense to him. I said, well, to play a musical instrument, you have your whole life. I said, when you wrestle, you can't do that your whole life. So the music will stay with you. Well, anyhow, years go by, and of course Mel is now lame like we all get, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And you can't do what you did before. And I saw him, I said, how you doing, Mel? He said, oh, I can't walk, arthritis, but you know, all this stuff. I said, well, you still wrestling with your kids? He said, no, he said, they're all full grown, and I couldn't do that anyhow. I can't even do it with my grandchildren. I said, you know, that's really too bad. I said, you know, I still play. And I'm playing with my grandchildren, and I play with my children, and we play. We get together and we play music. He said, I still can do that. I said, you didn't want to listen then. You would have had something today if you would have done a little practicing and playing an instrument. I don't know if he understood what I was saying. He's probably so brain dead already, you know. But I mean it. That I've never met anybody that has said to me, that hasn't said to me, I wish I could have played. I started to play and I gave up, and how nice it would be if I could play an instrument today. And I said, I believe everybody should play a kazoo. They should play something. I don't care what it is, but music is, you know, most important. It's soul fulfilling, you know. And that's what I want to say. Okay, cut it.